Kicking out of waves. It can be tricky at the best of times, but when we bring it to the backhand, a whole new level of complexity seems to unravel, as is the case with many aspects of surfing when we're beginning with our backhand surfing. Today, we have a question from Mama Mello, who stated that she can struggle kicking out on her backhand as the rotation feels awkward. To delve into this today, we'll cover the common problems, different approaches to this, and how we can learn to implement this correctly. In doing a bit of research for this video, I analysed a large number of kickouts that I have on footage, and that in conjunction with my own theory on the backhand kickouts is what we'll share with you today. Let's get into it. All right, what's going on, everyone? So welcome to another segment of Tip Time, where we take a deep dive into your questions. A couple of weeks ago, I actually released a video on kickouts, but it was more focused on the forehand kickout and the fundamentals. So today we'll be focusing on the backhand kickouts, but I think as a basis or a kind of baseline for the kickouts, if you want to check out that other video after this one today, that'll, I guess, bring it all together and provide a really nice overview of all the things that you can work on. So what we will cover today is the different sections that we actually will be kicking out in, and then the approach to the backhand and how we can do this successfully. So we'll cover a number of the main problems that we do typically see through this, and then, exactly how we can do this correctly to make sure we have as much success as possible with the backhand kickouts. If we cover the different sections that we kick out in, first thing I did want to point out is that we can actually wait for the wave to close out in some instances, so we don't need to necessarily do a backhand kick out as such. If we wait for that white water to come, or if we wait for the wave to close out so we're in the white water, what we can then do is we can just do a normal kick out like we described in the previous video, where we place weight onto the tail slowly and then allow that nose to lift up. We'll slow down, the wave will rush beneath us or through us, and then we'll put our hands on the front of the rails, and then we'll just be able to take control of the board. So it's a nice, easy kick out in the white water that we can use. You can see in the session that I'm referring to today that I use that multiple times. Now, the next sort of kick out is going to be a kick out on the shoulder of the wave. So I like to think this is a little bit easier than what we'll discuss next. But when we're on the shoulder of the wave, we've got plenty of time, not so much risk of the wave breaking down on us, sending us over the falls, or just making us fall in general. So it's a little bit slower and easier going. And then the next sort of section that we can get, of course, is the fast critical sections. There's a little bit of a different approach that we need to take for this, especially towards the later stages of our kick out. And so that's what we'll cover as well. I think the main problem that we'll cover today is we'll focus on the rotation. Again, in the question, this was one of the key points. And I think a lot of the other problems that we do have was actually covered in that previous video. So again, check that out if you haven't already. But with the rotation, and what we find a lot of the time with our backhand surfing in general, is our chest is facing the opposite direction, and then we've got our back facing the wave. And so directing ourselves to where we want to go can be really, really tricky. Now, in the previous episode of the Sunday Glide, I actually discussed this for our backside takeoffs and how it can be really, really tricky and some of the things we can do. The main things that I think we need to be focusing on are centered around the trailing arm, our toe, and then the position that we're actually getting our hips and chest into. So let's go into that now. So I think we can discuss our body positioning and the corrections we can make to rotate the best whilst we're going through the example. So the first example is going to be that first section, or the less steep section, which will be on the shoulder or as the wave is dying out. So the number one thing that we do need to make sure we're doing to begin with, and we'll take this step by step, but is making sure we look at and are analyzing the section that we're actually leading into. If we don't know where we're going, we don't actually know what section we're going into, and I guess what kick out strategy we need to actually apply. So definitely make sure that you've got your eyes set on where you're going to be kicking out on, and keep your eyes dialed in here because things can change. The next step is going to make sure that we do come back to the tail. With longboards, we're in a really tricky situation where we can't simply move our weight forwards and backwards to, filter our weight either into the middle or the back of the board, but we do need to use our cross stepping to come back to the tail. So that first step is going to make sure that we cross step back from the middle or the nose, depending on where you were, to the tail of the board, so that that back foot is at least very close to or just in front of where the fin is positioned. From here, what we're going to do is make sure that we're actually rotating the body to face the direction that we're going. Again, as we sort of alluded to before, if we have our back facing where we're wanting to go, or if we're too sideways facing, which again is a very typical problem on our backhand, then we're really going to struggle with this. So what we need to do is open up that chest, open up the hips to face forwards towards the nose of our board, because that nose is going to be going exactly where the board's going to trail off to. So there's a few different ways I like to go about this. Number one is going to be using the toe and disengaging the heel from the board. Now, we spoke about this in the previous episode of the Sunday Glide, but what this will help to do is allow you to create a pivot point, because we're able to pivot off that toe much more easily than if our heel and toe are connected to the board and everything stays pretty sticky there. It's difficult to pivot off. So if we actually get that heel to come up and we just have the toes engaged, then we can swivel around on those toes. What that will allow for is actually our hips to come and face forwards, and then our chest can face forwards as well. So now we're nice and streamlined, we're nice and parallel to the rails of the board, the stringer, and we're facing more so towards the nose of the board, which is really going to help in directing us off the face of the wave and allowing that rotation for the turn to happen. Again, as the question was asked, that rotation is one of the biggest things that we find tricky. On our forehand, it's nice and easy because we're already facing the side and we can think we're already facing where we want to exit, where we want to kick out. But on our backhand, we do need to adjust. So that foot can be a really good way to do this. The second thing that I want you to be thinking about is using the trailing arm. So I'm a goofy footer. If I'm going right, it's going to be my left arm. If you're a natural footer going left, it's going to be your right arm. And you're actually going to hook that around. And I like the cue of pointing in the direction that you want to be exiting the wave. This is because it will rotate the chest really nicely. If we just do this with our leading arm, so in my case, as a goofy footer, the right arm, we can still point in that direction whilst facing the side and not rotating our hips and chest where we need to be going. So that's why it's so important that it's that back arm that points or hooks around in the direction you want to go. And this will really help to open your chest up to that direction, so that you can be facing and exiting the wave properly. Now, the other thing that I did want to point out there is that toe on the board is very similar to the sort of position we'll get into for a drop knee turn. So if you know your drop knees and you know your backhand drop knee turns, those bottom turns, this is a really nice position to come into. You don't need to drop that knee as low as such. It's more about getting that toe on the board so that we can have that ability to pivot, rotate the hips and the chest forwards. Okay, so we're on a shouldery section. It's nice and flat, and we've managed to get ourselves into the position or into that chest forwards position so that we're facing the right direction. We've rotated nicely. The next step is actually going to be to actually position ourselves in the top third of the wave. So what we're going to do here is we're going to place a little bit of pressure on the tail, okay? It doesn't have to be a whole lot, just needs to be a little bit, and we're going to engage a turn from the bottom to the top of the wave. Now, this is just like a bottom turn, similar to what you would do if you're trying to position yourself in the top third of the wave for a nose ride, or if you're going for a backhand off the top. You're going to apply a little bit of pressure to the tail and a little bit of pressure to that inside rail as well. Now, once we're in the top third of that wave, if you keep applying pressure to that tail, we should just nicely drift off the back of that wave, at which point I just like to make sure that I'm reaching forwards with my hands to grab the rails, and then we can continue paddling off out the back. So there's not much more to that one, which is nice. And again, this is for that very mellow, it's the end of the wave, you're out on a shoulder, it's a nice fat, not steep section, it's nice and easy. I think the biggest things there is making sure that we rotate, and then from there on, making sure we drift up the wave by doing a little stall, so a little bit of weight on the tail, and then a little bit of weight on that inside rail to drift us up the top of the wave is the way to go. Okay, so now we're going to head into the sections where it's a little bit steeper, a little bit more critical, and if we just apply that method we spoke about, we might land in a pretty tricky position. The reason being, if we're in a very steep critical wave, if we just apply the brakes, what will often happen is that wave will be rushing behind us and it'll actually bring us into a really critical section. And if we don't do anything else and we just try to slowly come up the top of that wave, it's likely that the wave's going to break in our board, it's going to break on us, it's going to send us over the falls, or just cause us to fall in general. So we need another little method to make sure that we're protecting ourselves against that from happening. So everything that we spoke about up until this point, so getting ourselves to the top third of the wave like we did before, all of the rotations exactly the same. So let's start off from that point. Now, the consideration that we might want to make in this instance is that instead of doing a soft bottom turn up the top of the wave, we might want to make it a little bit more critical. The reason being, if we're sideways and at the top of the wave, there's a much more high likelihood that that wave is going to tilt our board and cause it to fall. Whereas if we do a larger bottom turn and we're a little bit more vertical as we're exiting that wave, it's much more likely that we're going to go over that ramp nice and smoothly and not be knocked backwards, because it's not going to cause that rail to flip and the board to tumble over. So I hope that's helped by the examples that we have there, where we are placing a lot of weight onto that tail. I'm straightening out my body and then I'm leaning forwards to grab the rails. Because again, if we stay too far on the tail, then we're just going to be in a position where obviously we're going to fall and the wave's more likely to push us back as well. So it is important to make sure that we're leaning over that center of the board to place our hands first and then our chest on the board to go over. Once we've done that, we can continue along paddling, get out the back and catch another one. So the second one is a little bit harder, or a lot harder to do than the first one, both with respect to, I guess, what we have to do as surfers and then the positions of the wave that we're doing them in as well. If you're not up to that yet, there's those other two. So the whitewater kick out, or the kick out in the fatter sections. And then just steadily progress through to the steeper sections. You don't have to go to, a 6 foot kind of closeout beachy straightaway to do this. You can just find some nice critical, mallow sections still that'll work for this one, kind of like what I was writing in the example here. But if you do implement some of this stuff, I'm really confident that you'll have a good result with it over the next few weeks. It does take a little bit of time to get used to all of this stuff and figure out exactly step by step what we need to do. But if you give it a go, you'll get some good results. So I'd love to hear how it's going. All right, and that'll do us for tip time. So again, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you got a bit out of it. I've had some really good feedback that you guys are getting a bit out of it and finding it valuable. So all of that feedback is great for me. Again, if you've got any questions for the next segment of Tip Time, which will be coming up in a week, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Love reading through them and love having a think about this and kind of reflecting on it in my own surfing as well. It's really, really useful. We've got another episode of the Sunday Glide coming up in a week's time as well on Sunday. So stay tuned for that. And other than that, hope you guys are getting waves. Hope this works well. Would love to hear how it's going, and we'll catch you on the next one.